Picture yourself standing on the windswept plains of Montana Territory in 1895. The air is crisp with the promise of winter, and in the distance you hear the rumble of wheels and the steady clip-clop of horses' hooves. Through the morning mist emerges a figure that would become the stuff of legend, a 6-foot-tall woman with shoulders broad as a lumberjack's, driving a stagecoach with the skill of a seasoned veteran. Her name was Mary Fields, but folks called her Stagecoach Mary. And her story is one of the most remarkable tales of courage, determination, and sheer grit that the American frontier ever produced. Now, before we dive into Mary's incredible journey, let's set the stage for what life was really like in the Montana Territory of the 1890s. This was a land where winter temperatures could drop to 40 below zero, where wolves still howled in the darkness, and where the nearest neighbor might be 50 miles away. It was a place that demanded everything from those who dared to call it home, and gave back only what you were strong enough to take. The frontier was changing rapidly in those days. The great cattle drives were winding down, railroads were stretching their iron fingers across the continent, and small towns were sprouting up like wildflowers after a spring rain. But there were still vast stretches of wilderness where civilization was nothing more than a distant dream, and it was in these places that people like Mary Fields made their mark. Montana Territory in the 1890s was a study in contrasts and contradictions. In the mining camps of Butte and Helena, fortunes were made and lost overnight as copper and silver poured from the earth. The newly arrived railroad brought eastern goods and eastern ways, but just a few miles from the tracks, life remained as wild and unpredictable as it had been for generations. Homesteaders struggled to scratch out a living from soil that could be generous one year and merciless the next, while ranchers grappled with harsh winters that could kill entire herds in a matter of days. The territory was home to a remarkable mix of people. There were Civil War veterans seeking fresh starts, immigrants from Ireland, Germany, and Scandinavia looking for land and opportunity, Chinese workers who had stayed after building the railroads, and Native American tribes trying to adapt to a world that was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. Into this complex tapestry came Mary Fields, a woman whose very presence challenged every assumption about who belonged on the frontier. Mary's story begins not in Montana, but in the slave quarters of Tennessee, where she was born around 1832. Like so many others of her generation, she experienced the brutal realities of slavery before tasting the sweet air of freedom that came with emancipation. The details of her early life remain largely lost to history, but we know that she emerged from those dark years with an unbreakable spirit and a determination to make something of herself that no one could take away. Unlike many former slaves who stayed in the South or moved to northern cities, Mary had her sights set on something different, something that would take her to the very edge of the known world. The South after the Civil War was a dangerous place for newly freed slaves, especially those with Mary's independent spirit and refusal to bow to anyone. The promise of the frontier, with its emphasis on individual capability over social status, must have seemed like a beacon of hope. After the Civil War, Mary found work with the Ursuline nuns, a Catholic order dedicated to education and service. These remarkable women were pioneers in their own right, establishing schools and missions in some of the most remote and challenging locations in America. It was through this connection that she first heard about the mission school the nuns were establishing in Cascade, Montana, a tiny settlement in the middle of what seemed like nowhere. The Ursuline nuns had a reputation for going where others feared to tread. They established missions among Native American tribes, in rough mining camps, and in isolated frontier settlements where education and medical care were desperately needed. Their work required not just spiritual dedication, but physical courage and practical skills that would challenge anyone. They needed someone strong, reliable, and fearless enough to help them build their school and serve the scattered communities of the territory. Mary Fields was all of those things and more. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, Mary was an imposing figure in any company. She could outwork most men, outshoot many of them, and had a vocabulary that could make a cavalry sergeant blush. She smoked cigars, drank whiskey when the mood struck her, and had a temper that was legendary even by frontier standards. But beneath that rough exterior beat the heart of someone who understood what it meant to serve others, especially those who had nowhere else to turn. Mary's physical presence was matched by an equally formidable personality. She had survived slavery, which meant she had endured things that would have broken many people. That experience had taught her to rely on herself, to trust her own judgment, and to never back down from a fight when she was in the right. These qualities, which might have been seen as problematic in a more settled society, were exactly what was needed on the frontier. The journey to Montana was an adventure in itself. In those days, getting to the territory meant weeks of travel by train, stagecoach, and wagon, crossing rivers, mountains, and endless stretches of prairie. The Transcontinental Railroad had been completed in 1869, but getting to remote places like Cascade still required additional travel by stagecoach or wagon, over roads that were often little more than rutted tracks across the wilderness. For a black woman traveling alone, the journey was fraught with additional dangers and challenges. Racial prejudice was not confined to the South, and Mary would have encountered hostility and discrimination at every stage of her journey. Hotels might refuse her service, restaurants might turn her away, and fellow travelers might treat her with suspicion or outright hostility. But Mary had faced down worse things than prejudice and hardship. She had survived slavery, and that experience had forged her into someone who simply refused to be broken. When she finally arrived in Cascade in 1885, Mary found a community that was barely more than a collection of rough buildings scattered across the prairie. The town consisted of a few stores, a saloon, a blacksmith shop, and perhaps 24 houses, all connected by muddy streets that turned to dust in summer and became nearly impassable in winter. The mission school was still under construction, and the nuns were struggling to establish their foothold in this harsh and unforgiving land. The challenges facing the Ursuline nuns in Cascade were enormous. They had to build their school from scratch, often with their own hands. They had to establish relationships with the local community, many of whom were suspicious of outsiders, especially Catholic nuns. They had to provide education and medical care to scattered homesteaders and their families, often traveling long distances over dangerous terrain to reach those in need. They needed someone who could do everything from hauling supplies to protecting the mission from the various dangers that threatened frontier settlements. They needed someone who could handle a team of horses, swing an axe, shoot straight, and stand up to anyone who might threaten their work. In short, they needed Mary Fields. Mary threw herself into the work with characteristic determination. She could handle a team of horses as well as any man, swing an axe with deadly precision, and shoot straight enough to put food on the table or drive off unwanted visitors. She became the mission's unofficial guardian, protector, and jack of all trades, earning the respect of both the nuns and the local community. Her work at the mission was varied and demanding. She hauled lumber and supplies from the railroad depot, helped with construction projects, tended the mission's garden and livestock, and served as a bodyguard for the nuns when they traveled to remote homesteads. She also became the mission's primary contact with the outside world, handling business transactions, negotiating with suppliers, and dealing with the various characters who drifted through frontier towns. Mary's reputation in Cascade grew steadily during her years at the mission. People learned that she was someone you could count on, whether you needed help with a difficult job, protection from troublemakers, or just someone to talk to who wouldn't judge you for your past mistakes. She became a fixture in the community, known for her generosity to those in need and her fierce loyalty to her friends. But it was her work with the U.S. Postal Service that would make Mary Fields a legend. In 1895, at the age of 63, Mary won the contract to carry mail between Cascade and the surrounding settlements. This might not sound like much to modern ears, but in the 1890s Montana Territory, it was one of the most dangerous and demanding jobs imaginable. The Postal Service was the lifeline that connected isolated frontier communities to the rest of the world, and mail carriers were among the most respected and essential members of frontier society. The mail route covered treacherous terrain, crossed rivers that could turn deadly without warning, and passed through areas where wolves, bears, and harsh weather posed constant threats. The route stretched across more than 50 miles of some of the most challenging country in America, including mountain passes that could be blocked by snow for months at a time, river crossings that could become impassable during spring floods, and stretches of open prairie where a person could easily become lost in a blizzard. The job required someone who could handle a team of horses in any weather, navigate by the stars when trails disappeared under snow, and defend the mail from bandits or wild animals. It required someone who would never give up, no matter how bad things got. It required someone with the physical strength to handle heavy mail sacks, the mental toughness to endure isolation and hardship, and the moral courage to risk their life for the sake of duty. In short, it required someone exactly like Mary Fields. The Postal Service contract was awarded through a competitive bidding process, and Mary's bid was successful, not just because of her low price, but because of her reputation for reliability and toughness. The postal authorities knew that the mail route required someone special, and Mary had proven herself over and over again during her years at the mission. Mary's mail route took her through some of the most beautiful and dangerous country in America. She would drive her wagon through valleys where elk grazed in the morning mist, across ridges where eagles soared overhead, and along rivers that ran crystal clear in summer and turned to ice in winter. The landscape was breathtaking in its beauty and terrifying in its indifference to human life. But she also faced blizzards that could bury a wagon in minutes, flash floods that could sweep away everything in their path, and temperatures so cold that exposed skin would freeze in seconds. The Montana winter was particularly brutal, with temperatures that could drop to 50 below zero and winds that could knock a person off their feet. Summer brought its own challenges, including thunderstorms that could turn dry creek beds into raging torrents and heat that could kill the unwary. The stories of Mary's adventures on the mail route became the stuff of frontier legend. There was the time she was caught in a blizzard so fierce that she couldn't see her own horses, but she kept driving by instinct and the sound of their breathing, finally reaching her destination after 18 hours in the saddle. Her hands were so frozen that she couldn't feel the reins, but she never let go, trusting her horses to find their way through the storm. There was the night she fought off a pack of wolves with nothing but a rifle and her own fierce determination, protecting not just herself, but the precious mail she carried. The wolves had been drawn by the scent of her horses, and Mary spent the entire night keeping a fire burning and taking shots at the glowing eyes that surrounded her camp. When dawn finally came, she counted more than a dozen wolf carcasses around her wagon. Perhaps the most famous story tells of the time Mary's wagon broke down in the middle of nowhere during a particularly harsh winter. With temperatures dropping and no help in sight, she unhitched her horses, loaded the mail onto her back, and walked 15 miles through knee-deep snow to make her delivery on time. The mail sacks weighed more than 100 pounds, but Mary carried them without complaint, arriving at her destination exhausted but triumphant. When asked later why she didn't just wait for help, Mary reportedly said, "The mail don't wait for nobody, and neither do I." This simple statement captured the essence of Mary's character and her understanding of her duty. She knew that people depended on her, and she would not let them down, no matter what the cost to herself. Mary's reputation for reliability was absolute. In 8 years of carrying the mail, she never missed a delivery, not once. Through blizzards, floods, heat waves, and every other challenge the Montana wilderness could throw at her, Mary Fields got the mail through. The Postal Service had a motto: neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. But Mary lived it in ways that the original authors could never have imagined. Her dedication went far beyond mere duty. Mary understood that in the scattered communities of the Montana frontier, the mail was often the only connection people had to the outside world. A letter from back east might be the only news a homesteader received for months. A package might contain medicine that could save a life, or supplies that could mean the difference between surviving the winter and perishing in the cold. The mail wasn't just paper and packages to Mary. It was hope, connection, and sometimes survival itself. The people along Mary's route came to depend on her for more than just mail delivery. She became a one-woman support system for the isolated families and communities she served. She would carry messages between settlements, deliver supplies to those who couldn't make the trip to town, and even provide medical assistance when needed. Her wagon became a lifeline for people who might otherwise have been completely cut off from the world. Mary's presence on the frontier challenged every stereotype about who could succeed in the American West. Here was a black woman, born into slavery, who had not only survived but thrived in one of the most demanding environments imaginable. She proved that courage, determination, and skill mattered more than race or gender when it came to earning respect on the frontier. But Mary's impact went beyond her individual achievements. She became a symbol of possibility for others who might have thought the frontier was closed to them. Her success opened doors and changed minds, showing that the American West was truly a place where anyone could make their mark if they had the strength and determination to seize the opportunity. The communities Mary served recognized her contributions in ways both formal and informal. She was invited to community celebrations, consulted on important decisions, and treated with the respect due to someone who had proven herself time and again. When she finally retired from the mail route in 1903, the entire territory seemed to breathe a collective sigh of gratitude for her years of service. Mary's later years were spent in Cascade, where she had become something of a local celebrity. Visitors would come from miles around just to meet the famous Stagecoach Mary, and she was always happy to share stories of her adventures on the mail route. She opened a laundry service and continued to be an active member of the community until her death in 1914. The legacy of Stagecoach Mary extends far beyond her individual accomplishments. Her story represents the broader truth about the American frontier, that it was built by people of all backgrounds who shared a common determination to create something better for themselves and their communities. African American pioneers like Mary Fields played crucial roles in the development of the West, yet their stories have often been overlooked in popular accounts of frontier history. Mary's life also illustrates the unique opportunities that the frontier offered to those brave enough to seize them. In the established communities of the East, a black woman born into slavery would have faced insurmountable barriers to advancement. But on the frontier, where survival depended on competence rather than social status, Mary was able to build a life of respect, independence, and genuine achievement. Her story reminds us that the American frontier was not just about cowboys and gunfighters, gold rushes, and cattle drives. It was also about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, often in circumstances that would challenge the strongest among us. Mary Fields carried the mail, but she also carried the hopes and dreams of an entire community on her shoulders. The image of Mary Fields driving her mail wagon across the Montana prairie, a solitary figure against the vast sky, determined to complete her mission no matter what obstacles lay ahead, captures something essential about the American spirit. It speaks to our belief that individual determination can overcome any challenge, that service to others is its own reward, and that true heroism is often found in the simple act of doing one's duty, day after day, regardless of the cost. As we remember Stagecoach Mary today, we honor not just her individual courage and determination, but the countless other pioneers who helped build the American West through their daily acts of service and sacrifice. Her story stands as a testament to the power of the human spirit to triumph over adversity and create something lasting and meaningful from the raw materials of courage, determination, and an unshakable commitment to serving others. In the end, Mary Fields proved that the frontier belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it, and her legacy continues to inspire us to push beyond our own limitations and serve something greater than ourselves.